Welcome to the broadcast tonight. 4 pre-recorded segments on 3 different subjects. I note that because you'll see me wearing 3 different suits, and we don't normally do that in the body of one program. We begin with Terry Riley. He is the curator of the Museum of Modern Art, and they have a new exhibit about architect Rem Koolhaas. We'll follow that with a conversation with the architect himself, noted as being one of the best architects at work today, also planning a new city in France. Later, we'll talk with James Cunin. He is a journalist. He will be joined by the parents of Shannon Fair. They are the parents of a young victim of a fatal bus crash. Cunin wrote a book chronicling their struggle to find answers about their daughter's death. Later in the broadcast, Marshall Goldman, the professor, will talk about what is happening in Russia today. We begin with Terry Riley. The Museum of Modern Art in New York has long been known as a place which puts together outstanding and extraordinarily significant architectural exhibits. Terence Riley did that with Frank Lloyd Wright. He now does it with Rem Koolhaas, the architect who lives in London and works out of Rotterdam. It is called O.M.A. at MoMA. I'm pleased now to have Terence Riley join me to talk about Rem Koolhaas and about this exhibit. Welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
Tell me who, for those who don't know, Rem Koolhaas is, and we're going to meet him as soon as you and I finish this understanding of what's happening at MoMA, and why it was important now, at long last, to have this exhibit, which has been in the works for several years at MoMA.
I think the reason why the show is so timely right now is because not only the architectural profession, but I think the public at large is in a sort of transitional phase, wondering what it is that architects actually do and what do they do well. What kind of vision can they bring to our cities and to the architecture within them. Rem Koolhaas is a young architect by architectural standards.
He's 50.
He's 50. It's the kindest profession.
Yes.
He was previously living in New York and working on the book, which I see you have here, Delirious New York.
This is a book that's became a cult book in New York, published in 1978, I remember, called Delirious New York, which was about it was a poem to New York, in a sense.
And as he called it, a retroactive manifesto, looking back on the city. And interestingly enough, I think he's one of the architects who doesn't consider the city to be a problem. He's a defender of congestion, a defender of what he calls the culture of congestion. And instead of looking at the city as a circulation problem or a parking problem or a noise problem, or a problem about confusion and chaos, Koolhaas actually defends these qualities as the essence of our cities. For some reason, people keep moving to cities and living in cities. Interestingly, more people live in Manhattan now than ever before. And is that because Manhattan is such a problem, or is it because there's something here that can't be had elsewhere? I think that's what Koolhaas is looking for in his...
What's the defining quality of his work?
I'd have to say that there's no one word. I think each project responds to a different urban condition. I think that if you were to put it in a capsule description, I'd say that Koolhaas seeks to sort of look to the basic roots of modernism, of 20th century architecture, and not see them in a sympathetic, or I shouldn't say sympathetic, but not in a nostalgic way, as something that happened before World War II, but as something that's living and ongoing, and trying to find out how that's relevant for today.
Is he a part of the modernism school?
I think in the broadest sense, yes. I mean, he's been described as a postmodern modernist and a modern postmodernist. Right. I think we're also in a period where those two terms and what they mean, there's a certain shifting going on. There isn't this sort of Punch and Judy polemic, modern on one hand and postmodern on the other hand. I think people are realizing that even if you're sympathetic to the goals or the ideals of modernism, this isn't the same period.
I mentioned you and what I thought was an extraordinary exhibit, the Frank Lloyd Wright exhibit, which was, what, last year?
It was closed in May.
Enormously successful. How is he different from Wright, and how is he similar to Wright?
Well, Wright, as was Le Corbusier, was not a big fan of the city.
Yes.
You know, Corb's plan to demolish the whole Marais, yes, to put up his towers in the park, and of course Wright's vision of Broadacre City, which was to replace urban living.
suburban
design
cities.
Exactly. Coast to coast. In fact, in the end, not only obliterating the cities, but sort of changing all of nature. Koolhaas is obviously the defender of cities. He's the defender of the city as a survivor, and I think he sees the city as having its own justification. It doesn't need to sort of prove its own worth. Oddly enough, there is some, and you have to be careful about visuals, because things that look alike aren't always alike. But it is interesting to note that in terms of the project for La Villette that he did, it looks a little bit like Broadacre City. There is a sort of all-over diffusion. But again, that's looking like, and that's not always the same as what something means.
Significance of Eurelil, which is the city in France that he is going to transform. He, along with some other architects, but he's what we would call the urban planner. He is the urban planner, although he's an architect, but he is designing a city, and he's designed part of it, and other architects are coming in to do that. What's the significance of Eurelil?
Well, it's actually the way he's acting as a designer. I think Rem believes that he designed it, for the most part. But what you're talking about is he designed a scenario into which other architects sort of plugged in. So, oddly enough, you can't say that he designed this, he designed that, but in the end, it looks the way it does because of the guidelines, because of the sort of restrictions. And I'm not talking about zoning or saying what it's supposed to look like, but the whole sort of scenario that he set up in terms of how the different, the ultra-fast trains, the highway, the tram, all of these things come together in his scheme into this central point, and the city sort of grows from there. And if you think about it, that's the way a lot of traditional cities grow. And by making those basic decisions, like Pittsburgh down in the Point, everything radiating out from that, Paris from the Ile de la Cité, you wind up with a integral, or I should say a very important decision being made at the beginning of the growth that affects the whole thing. And I think in that sense, Koolhaas did act as sort of a super designer.
Exhibit runs, it's all on one floor, it's all in one place, unlike Wright, which was over and under and all around. You'll get a chance to see his work, and it's also outside of the museum.
Well, since the whole point of the exhibition was to talk about public space and the public realm, what we did was we actually took part of the show out into the streets. And if you go into the subway platform near the museum, the telephone kiosk across the street, or the construction fence various places on 53rd Street, we actually brought part of the exhibition out into the street.
Terence Riley, thank you very much.
Thank you.
When we come back, Rem Koolhaas will be here. We'll talk about his life and about his architecture and about his dreams. Back in a moment. Stay with us.